Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Mondays on Mondays. This is the CDH Dad and
the CDH Warrior.
And just to refresh people who may not have listened to us previously or missed some things, the reason we do Mondays on Mondays is our last name is Mondays. We post this on Mondays. But the focus of our discussion is for families with children with medical needs and how to deal with the life experiences that go along with that. And part of the reason we discuss this is the fact that my son almost 30 years ago was unexpectedly born with CDH, congenital diaphragmatic hernia, which required immediate transfer from hospital to hospital to hospital, and also multiple surgeries and treatments. And after a couple of years, we had my daughter, had her checked out extremely well at birth, did not see any issues with her health, and unexpectedly, when she was a year and a half old, she contracted aplastic anemia, which basically means that her bone marrow system shut down. And because of that, she required a bone marrow transplant and the resulting medical issues from that. So my wife and I and the family have had to go through a lot of unexpected life experiences, and a lot of experiences that are not necessarily things that it's easy to find a lot of information on and a lot of support for, because these are not typical medical conditions. With CDH, it's 1 in 2,500, 1 in 3,000 roughly births. Aplastic anemia is at that age about 1 in 2 million. 1 in 2 million.
1 in 2.5 million.
So to have two children like that made it extremely unique and difficult. So what we try and do is have a weekly discussion of topics and issues that surround living as a family with these types of conditions. And at our point, our children have pretty much grown up and are adults and functioning normally, as normal can be.
Yeah.
Now, one of the disclaimers we typically try and put in here is that we are not medical professionals, we are not doctors, nurses, therapists, anything along those lines. We're not psychologists, sociologists, social workers, anything from that standpoint. But we are active in social media, and a lot of organizations deal with these type conditions. I know you're involved with the CDH nonprofit. I also keep in contact with aplastic anemia, bone marrow transplant, and GVHD, graft versus host disease issues. And those are the type of things that, we try and help and support with people that are going through these type of conditions. But it's also a lot of times are just basic lifestyle situations that you have to determine how to deal with. And for today's topic, one of the things we discussed is that, now that we're in the middle of the first of the year, winter time in most places, and a lot of the concerns about normal illnesses, the flu, colds, viruses, all of those things that go around. What we wanted to discuss today is how do you deal with a child that has a compromised immune system or is more susceptible to problems if they do pick up an illness, and how do you deal with that and still try and be a normal family. So thank you once again for joining us, and
with that, let's roll the title.
Hello, and once again, just for your information, I know at some point in time we will have a email address that will show up on the screen, and with that you can contact us and ask any questions, make any comments, suggestions, those items. As I mentioned previously, the discussion that we wanted to have today is related to how do you try and have a normal function with a child, which is difficult anyway if you've got a child during the cold and flu season, just being out in the general public and being concerned about exposure to those things. But how do you do that if you have a child that has special needs and conditions, and you need to be very cautious about the interactions and contact that you have?
Yeah.
So, from our experience, it's one, I will be honest, that neither of my children really contracted colds, flu, viruses, any of those type conditions often, and it was very rare that we had those type situations. And part of this was we worked through a process of evolving into interactions into the real world.
Yeah.
As I'd mentioned previously, my son was congenital diaphragmatic hernia, and respiratory issues are the biggest concern. So we needed to minimize anything that would deal with colds, the flu, any type of respiratory illnesses from that standpoint.
Yeah.
And this is a matter of, as a parent, being hyper vigilant, being out in public, who you're around, minimizing being close to or exposed to people who may be coughing, those type of things, which is normal for any parent with a child, because you want to minimize those types of exposures. But in our case, it was also one of having to minimize some of the cross exposure that we could deal with. My son was just entering nursery school and preschool age at the time my daughter was recovering from bone marrow transplant.
Yeah.
And because of that, we delayed a half a year in entering him into the preschool program, because we wanted to avoid the exposure that he could pick up something from the children that he was dealing with and then bring it back to his sister, who was at a seriously autoimmune issue concern at that point.
Yeah.
So those are type things that you have to kind of think on your own, also talk with your medical professionals and therapists and those people, and discuss, okay, what kind of conditions can be done. The other is, you don't want to keep your child isolated. They need to have the experience of being out in the real world and being as normal as possible. So from that standpoint, you're going to be out. You're going to go out and do things. But you try and avoid large crowds. You try to avoid places where there is a prevalence of illness. Yeah. But I know in our case, we kept hospital masks, a box of those available. And if the children were out and we were concerned, we would put a mask on the child. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times you get questions from people. Oh, well, is your child sick? Do they have something? It's like, well, they have a condition, but let me explain that part of this is I don't want them to be exposed to illnesses and conditions and whatever may be going around that they could pick up. So the mask helps keep some people at arm's length at least. Yeah. And some of that, hopefully, they think in some cases to protect themselves versus protecting the child. But those are the type of things that you need to do. The other is make sure that you keep antibacterial wipes handy, so that you can anything that the children may come in contact with, that you wipe everything down, wipe their hands on a regular basis to try and keep those clean, and avoid those type of contacts that things can do. Also, anything that they put in their mouth, just try and make sure that you don't have access to those type of things, and the children avoid those accesses to those type things.
Yeah.
But it's also one that, you're going to go through points in time that, hopefully you can get into social interaction with your children, and they're going to have their friends, and they're going to have parties, and they're going to have meetings, and they're going to have play dates and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's again where you go and you just try and maintain a communication with some of the parents that you can feel comfortable with explaining your child's health conditions, and they can also help the eyes and ears of what may be going around in that particular environment and community, what they see with other children. They will also help keep an eye on your child and what types of interactions that they have with other children and other parents, and how to, kind of give you a red flag of, well, I think that child's got a runny nose over there, so you may want to try and minimize contact with that child or that family for that reason. It's not that you're going to isolate, but for a period of time you want to try and minimize that. Did you have comments?
Well, I had a comment. I remember, even now people are actually hilarious, I remember COVID myths.
Yeah.
And I had a number of questions of, well, it's not just a simple virus. It's not going to kill you. You're not in any danger. You're not going to die. It's like, if I get a respiratory virus, I mean, I'll be honest, I've got the edge of something that I've had for, 3 weeks?
Yeah, several weeks.
No, it may not kill me, but it will literally limit my ability to function for weeks, sometimes months. And that's what people don't understand, is they want to put well, you're just some scared idiot. No. We know what this stuff does to us. We know what happens, what the possible outcomes are. And we try and minimize the exposure anywhere we can.
It is, and it's one, I've seen parents who have tried to keep their children isolated and not in contact with the potential for the illnesses and things like that, or go overboard. And there's got to be a balance in this, because you do want children to have some exposure to things. You don't want to be at a point where they don't have the natural immunities that build up in these cases. But you also want to be able to minimize the chance that there is a severe respiratory illness or that type of thing that can impact your child. And sometimes it can be a minute occasion. In my daughter's case, this was one that while she was in the hospital, in an isolation unit in the bone marrow transplant facility, was that she ended up being exposed, and we were fortunate to have a infectious disease doctor that we were familiar with from when my son was in the hospital. Both children were at the same facility, and we knew the staff at those. But she was able to recognize my daughter's illness very quickly and realized that she most likely had a fungal infection, and we needed to take rapid treatment in that. Part of that was a case of normal protocol would be to take blood samples, run the cultures, look to see what it is, whether it's gram-positive, gram-negative, all the other things, and then get a treatment plan. The problem is, by the time we had those results, with her immune system compromised, she would have most likely died from the condition. So we took the step, talking with the doctor, and went ahead and started a treatment plan before they had the results back. And then we were able to adjust that treatment once they had the details. But in her case, she was exposed to fusarium, which is a common fungus and gardening in the yard.
I should say it's
It's
a common grass fungus that
Well,
most people don't think about.
It's common garden. It's called tomato wilt. It causes the leaves on your tomato plants to wilt and die off, and impacts the yield of your tomatoes. But apparently, someone who was in and out of that room that we were in, because she was isolated and not outside, had stepped through somewhere, had that on their shoes. Then that ended up being in contact with her, and she picked up that illness, and that was, quite severe.
Yeah.
And we were fortunate, because in most cases that would have been her death.
Yeah.
But that was something we were able to work with the medical professionals that we knew and worked with to do that. So part of this is, you need to work on a plan and what works for you in terms of minimizing the exposure of your child to that. But then at the other standpoint is being aware that if you see something, say something, be able to talk to your medical professionals very quickly. And in some cases, it's you need to make sure that you have access to 24-hour medical information and contacts. And with the medical profession the way it is now, it's not that you will have 24-hour contact with your doctor, but hopefully you will have 24-hour telecommunications with the medical staff, so that you can get a quick answer to some of those things, and hopefully get that information relayed to someone that can give the proper answers and treatment that's needed for that, because it does take a team to help take care of your child. You're the first and foremost in terms of monitoring and observing and seeing what you see in terms of your child's health and exposure, conditions, concerns. But then it's also one that you have to feel comfortable that you can raise that concern and get the answers. Take immediate action if it's necessary.
I think it's been interesting the last several years where we've got telehealth that has come up.
Right.
That you can go through and Skype or
Well, it's
or
fairly
Zoom
simple.
or something with your doctor, and not have. If you're sick, you don't have to leave your house.
Right, and it makes it better all the way around, because it may be difficult for you to explain to the doctor or nurse exactly what you see with your child, but if the doctor can see your child without having to go into the doctor's office or into the medical facility, that does two things. It helps get an immediate answer to a question,
and it helps limit exposure.
That's what I was thinking. It
For
limits
yourself
exposure,
and for others around you.
It is, because when you go into a doctor's office, many times people are there because they have sick children or a sick person, and you need to minimize that exposure. So
a lot of people laugh at this, but I remember, I think it was Dr. Kraft that had two entrances.
yeah,
A sick and a well entrance.
Oh, yeah. Well, there's also one, even with you, with Dr. Albibi, and you don't necessarily remember Dr. Albibi, who was your pediatrician. But in that case, we went through the back door into the office, and that way we did not get exposed to any illnesses that were in the waiting room area.
Yeah.
And there were some special accommodations in this. But if you have a child that has non-normal type medical conditions, in those cases, it helps to have a doctor who can understand and make the accommodations for that type of treatment. Okay. I think we've covered the topic for today, so thank you very much for being here and listening to us discussing the Mondays on Mondays, and have a great week and a wonderful new year.
See you next time.